Thank you for coming to the launch of this report. I'd like to congratulate the CFO and the team, especially Lalita, for the work that has been put into this report. In 2018, I published a book entitled Minister of Finance Incorporated. In that book, we studied the government-linked system, government-linked companies, how we created a shadow world, a shadow market through which they finance the political system. This book clearly indicated that there was this concept of dark money being moved through the government into the political system. The links between politicians and business had taken a new turn. If we were now seeing a system where politics and business was between private firms and politicians in power, now we were seeing a system of where governments controlled by politicians were being exploited to channel money into their political parties. That itself was a major expose. In 2018, soon after the government fell, corruption cases were filed against these politicians who were involved in this dark world, in this 1MDB type nexus involving political parties, politicians in power, and private firms. But what was exposed during the corruption cases was very interesting. It drew attention to another phenomenon, another institution, which we knew little of. This institution was foundations. This institution was foundation. You say another mic I can use. Is it okay now? Okay, let me get on with this. What was central in these court cases, it kept coming up, was the financing of politics, but through another institution within the political system, and that was foundations. What they showed was money was being channeled from the private sector, as well as from government bodies, 1MDB for example, as well as other GLCs, including the GLICs like Khazanah and Patronage. Money was being channeled into these foundations, which was then used to finance party and general elections. What we also saw was when this money went into these foundations, they were channeled down to the grassroots, to the party members, further reinforcing the point of the politics of patronage that had now come to be the order of the day in Malaysian politics. What we were also seeing here was that these kinds of foundations were not only existing at the federal level, they were also prevalent at the state level. We were shocked at the number of foundations that were in the system, controlled by politicians, and we knew nothing about these foundations. Yes, they were mentioned in the court cases, but we did not connect the dots to show how these foundations had now become another covert tool by politicians in the financing of their political activities. Interestingly also, the court cases revealed two important factors. One, the volume of money that we were talking about here was stupendous. An incredible amount of money was being brought into the political system, and we had no clue where this money was coming from. What it also involved was high levels of corruption. The court cases brought it out very well. The question that then emerged to us was this: where is all this money coming from? When did politicians begin using foundations as a mechanism for political financing? So let me take you now back in history. To understand this phenomenon, we go back to 1981. I'm not saying that there were no foundations before 1981, but I'm talking about the links between foundations and political parties and the financing of politics. In 1981, Mahathir Mohamad came to power, and he changed the way in which the political system began to operate in a fundamental way. He talked about the need for public policies such as the Bumiputra commercial and industrial community to create a new Malay capitalist class. And how was he going to do this? Selective patronage. He would take government concessions and pass it to those who he felt were winners, and these winners were now going to emerge as major figures in the corporate sector, controlling conglomerates. Something else happened in 1981. At that time, there was a major battle in UMNO for the post of deputy president. Razali Hamza versus Musa Hitam. In that election, for the first time, we saw the use of money during the UMNO General Assembly to buy votes. It happened again in 1984. It happened again in 1986, when in 1987, when we had the fight Team A versus Team B. The volume of money had continued to grow in these party elections. Team A, Team B was when Razali and Musa combined forces to take on Mahathir and came within a whisker of capturing Rumba. Soon after that, there was a major destabilization of the party. UMNO was declared an illegal party. Mahathir forms UMNO Baru, and he changes the rules for elections. From now on, if you want to win the elections, it's not about winning elections during the General Assembly. You have to go down to the grassroots. And here, mind you, we are talking about, according to the party, about 3 million members. So if you wanted to win the elections, you had to use a lot of money to get enough nominations to run in the General Assembly. The whole system had changed again. And then a new phenomenon emerged. In 1993, we had a major fight for the post of Deputy Presidency. Anwar Ibrahim versus Gapa Baba. Anwar created what was known as the Wawasan team, the Vision team. The Vision team comprised people such as Muhyiddin, at that time Chief Minister of Selangor, Muhammad Taib, Chief Minister of Selangor, Najib Razak. The way he selected his team was because these people had enormous grassroots support at the state level. The Wawasan team won. And in that election, the volume of money that flowed into the party was huge. We had not seen this kind of money flowing to the party before. And why was there such a huge volume of money being used in this election? Because that money had to be channeled down to the grassroots to win enough nominations so that you can run as Deputy President or for the other posts, such as Vice President, as well as UMNO Youth. This was a momentous point in Malaysian history. The members of the Wawasan team, in UMNO, it's important to note this, Anwar came with this girl becoming Prime Minister before he was ousted in 1998. But two other members of the Wawasan team, Muhyiddin and Najib, went on to become Prime Ministers of Malaysia. What we also saw in this party election was the creation now of the phenomenon of warlords. Now, if you wanted to win an election, you had to have lots of money. But something else was happening in this election which I want to draw your attention to. Remember, I mentioned that Mahathir wanted to create corporate captains, Malay corporate captains. If you go back to that momentous election in 1993, during the debates, they brought up the concepts of Korporat Melayu, corporate Malay. They brought up the concept of Melayu Baru, New Malay, making a distinction between the old Malay and the new Malay. The new Malay is this corporate Melayu, the new middle class. So you're seeing here in this election the monetization of politics and the creation of a nexus between politics and business, the so-called corporate Melayu. All this soon came to be embedded in the political system. Then we began to see a new phenomenon, the concept of the revolving door. Politicians entering into business, businessmen entering into politics. Among the key members of this revolving door was Dan Zainuddin, a businessman brought into the political system, who became finance minister, then left the political system, then returned back into the political system, and went out, the revolving door. Anwar and his team too began to create a revolving door. Politicians in UMNO now were entering business in a big way. They were now getting access to government rents. They were now becoming corporate players. So now we are seeing the phenomenon of politicians becoming businessmen and key figures in the corporate sector. Before, it was well-connected businessmen who had the patronage of Mahathir and Dan, who had become key players in the corporate system. Two different types of key actors in the corporate system, both contributing to the financing of politics. Today, if you read the report, we have a case study on Zahid Hamidi and Adnan Mansur. Zahid Hamidi was a politician, a political secretary linked to Najib Razak. He then enters into business. He uses the Jaya son, he uses a foundation which was controlled by UMNO Youth. Through that foundation, he has links to important companies such as publicly listed Terkenal holdings. By his own admission, Zahid says, I became rich through Terkenal holdings. He then goes on, by his own admission, to be involved in a number of publicly listed firms. And then he enters mainstream politics. He becomes an MP in Bangladesh. Then he goes on to create his own personal foundations, which are now at the center of these cases that you are now seeing in court. Then we have Adnan Mansoor. Adnan Mansoor took a different route. He started out in business. And then he enters into politics, and he was part of that 1993 campaign where he got elected into the Supreme Council. Now we are beginning to see how money has become important in UMNO elections. I'm showing you the different routes through which politicians were now entering into business, as well as businessmen were entering into politics. The whole picture was becoming extremely complex. Mahathir, recognizing that this was happening, then said, we need to have a General Assembly to solve this problem. He said at the General Assembly, if once we were poor, now we are very rich. If once we gathered to discuss our poverty, he was talking about Malay poverty, now he was referring to how a new elite, a rich elite, had been created. This is our history. Mahathir admitted it. He said, a cancer had permeated the body. The words of the good doctor. The cancer had now spread deep into UMNO. This destabilized the party again. In 1998, we saw another fracture in the party, Mahathir versus Anwar. As you can see here, the persistent destabilization of UMNO because of money politics. I'd like to move forward from that defining moment in 1998, where Anwar is ousted, to 2013. In that period, we had two prime ministers, Abdullah, who came to power, and Abdullah mentioned that we have to clean up corruption in Malaysia. He did not do it. In 2009, Najib came to power. And remember, Najib came to power soon after the global financial crisis emerged. The economy was in recession. And when he took power, he said, we must do this. We must eradicate corruption, rent-seeking, and patronage. His words. And he did not do it. In fact, it became worse. In 2013, that was a momentous election because Najib wanted to further consolidate his position. Remember, in 2008, they did very badly. They lost 5 state governments. 2013 was a momentous election where Najib wanted to regain lost ground. The volume of money that was used now in the general election, this is not party election, in the general election was also huge. This was the first time we were seeing, we could clearly see the volume of money that was being dispersed during the general election was unprecedented. In an attempt to regain lost ground, the pursuit of power. Where was all this money coming from? 2 years later, we found out. 1MDB, a GLC, created by Najib, a covert mechanism through which he could garner funds, which he then used to channel into the political system. The difference is, here now the money had entered the larger electoral system. If before we were talking about money politics within UMNO, now we were talking about serious money politics, serious distribution of money, big money, during a general election. Now money politics was permeating the country. The situation was getting dire. Much of this was exposed in the book, Minister of Finance Incorporated. This complex world that had been created both at the federal level, at the state level too, to find ways and means to draw money which can be used to fight during general and state elections. No party supported the reform of the financing of politics. There was no discussion even after Pakatan came to power, to reform the GLC world. Mahathir himself called it the monster. That was his word, the word he used, the monster. But when he came to power, he did not move to reform this GLC world because it was too important to the political system. Through this GLC world, you could also get access to money, and you can also use it to play the politics of patronage, to consolidate power, the pursuit of power. No politician, whether in Barisan Nasional or in Pakatan, were willing to make the change. That is the situation we now find ourselves in. This brings me now to foundations. Another new covert tool that we have now been exposed to, fortunately through the trials, the serious corruption cases which is now going on in court. How bad is this situation of the monetization of politics in this country? When will the political will arise to deal with this? So how bad is the situation? Let me stop here and show you the new evidence that we have found, or which, as Cynthia said, this is not new. It's there in the public domain. But we're just trying to bring out to you more clearly, connecting the dots about how foundations are used.